Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 Senate map. And I'm doing this today because A, I haven't posted in a while, and I want to get back to posting like I used to, like every other day or that kind of thing. And B, because I'm going to be on a podcast that's coming out, I think on Thursday, sometime at the during the latter half of this week, where I will be discussing the Senate map and talking about what we're looking at for the midterms as of right now. And so I thought that I'd give you guys where I currently stand, and then on the podcast, you hear me go into a lot of depth and have a conversation about these competitive Senate races, specifically in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, and talk about how that's going to affect the balance of power in the Senate after 2022. So we're going to hop right into it because I want to make this video pretty quick. I don't have a ton of time on my hands right now, so we're just going to get right into it with our safe Democratic states. These are states that would normally be safe for the Democrats. Nothing much has fundamentally changed in any of these states since I last gave you guys a prediction. There's also if you say Republican states, we've got these. Iowa's also safe because Chuck Grassley's running. Both of Oklahoma's races are safe. The reason that there's another Oklahoma election instead of just one is because Senator Jim Inhofe is going to be retiring, so there'll be a special election to replace him, as well as there'll be two coinciding elections in November. But yeah, that's 44 safe seats to the GOP, 45 for the Democrats. And then the Democrats, Colorado, they're going to win. I don't know by how much. It could be by as little as 6, could be by as much as 12 or 13. But that range would be in the range of what we consider to be a likely margin. I'm going to be doing ratings in this episode based on probability, so I do think that Colorado is likely to stay with the Democrats. But at the same time, I do not think that it's entirely safe. It's just likely to go their way, and I don't think they're going to lose it. Like, I'd be very surprised if they lose Colorado. The GOP, Alaska, as well as Florida and Ohio, I think are all quite likely for them. These states are very, very, at this point, solid for the GOP. I could see the GOP winning by 10 in all of them. I think they're going to win by 10 in Alaska and Ohio. Florida should be a little closer because I think polarization will help the Democrats, keep the margin kind of close, but it will still be fairly Republican. Rubio is probably going to win by a similar margin to what he did in 2016, where he beat Patrick Murphy by about, I think 8%. And he's going to be running against Val Demings this time. And Demings is a good candidate. I think she can do a lot of good things for the Democrats in Florida, but the turnout's just not going to be there for her. She'll be losing, grounded. Like, Biden lost the state by 3%, and Rubio will be probably outrunning Trump with every demographic, including Hispanics, suburbanites, and even, I think rural white voters can get even more Republican with Rubio. So I do expect Florida to be, pretty solid for the GOP in 2022. Wisconsin and North Carolina are going to be our next two likely GOP states, but they're not like in the same ballpark of, likely. They're both likely to go for the GOP, but I think that they're a bit closer than the prior three that I mentioned. And I say that because both of these states were within 2% in 2020, whereas these other three were not. And Wisconsin is technically a Biden state. And so I know that we don't really consider it to be a blue state anymore because it's trending so far to the Republican Party. But the turnout we're going to see, but the turnout that we saw in 2020 was favorable to Democrats, and Biden did win Wisconsin in 2020. So 2022, Ron Johnson's running for re-election. He'll have a huge fundraising advantage. He's won elections he wasn't supposed to win before. In 2016, he was supposed to lose. He had I think an 80% chance of losing according to some sources, and he ended up beating out Russ Feingold in that race. And that was probably the most interesting Senate election of that year. It was an upset. It was not supposed to happen, and he won. So I think with a tested incumbent like Ron Johnson, I don't think he'll have as much of a problem holding on this year. Mandela Barnes is a decent candidate for Democrats, but I don't think he's going to get back the coalition that they need to win the state, because he'll either have to do really, really well with suburbanites in Waukesha, outside of Milwaukee, the way Biden did, or get back the Obama. Well, not exactly, but he'll have to, go a little closer to Obama than Biden in some of the working class areas, and I don't think that he's able to do that. So without him making up ground in the suburb or with working class voters, I think that Johnson's going to win re-election pretty easily. North Carolina, Sherry Beasley's not a bad candidate again. Like, the Democrats have decent candidates in these races. They're not losing because they can't recruit candidates. They're losing because the partisanship of this country is not very favorable to them right now. And the GOP in North Carolina, I think they're in a good position. They should win fairly easily here. Now, the Democratic Party, I think that they've got one lean state. That is the state of New Hampshire. And New Hampshire is a state that I consider to be, I think you could say lean in margin, likely in probability. I mean, I could easily put it as likely, but out of an abundance of caution on how it is lean. Maggie Hassan is probably going to win re-election. I'd bet on her winning. She probably has like a 3 in 4 chance of winning. But in the event that, the generic ballot gets really, really bad for Democrats, I could see, a slip up where she happens to lose. in a really stunning race. But I don't think that's going to happen. I still think that this race is going to be, um, fairly well into Democratic hands come November. Uh, you know, I think it'll be about a 5 to 7% margin of victory for Hassan. So she should run a little behind Biden because it will be a more Republican year. But she's still a good incumbent. 2016, she beat out an incumbent Republican, and I do not think that she's going to have as tough a battle this year as she did in 2016. So the GOP are going to. I do think that they're going to flip Georgia, and I say that they're going to flip Georgia by I guess a lean probabilities because look, Raphael Warnock is a good incumbent, but the numbers he got when he won in 2021 in that runoff are not likely to be seen again in 2022. And I say that mostly because the GOP in that runoff basically hit their floor. They did not do very well in rural areas. They did okay in suburban areas. Like Loeffler ran ahead of Trump in most areas in suburban Georgia, or in suburban Atlanta, I guess I should say. But she did really worse in there. She did a lot worse in the rural areas. The turnout was really bad for her, and she did worse with black voters and she did worse in urban areas. So, like Warnock will probably do well in the suburbs again. He'll do better than Hillary Clinton in 2016. He'll do well for a Democrat in Georgia. But when we talk about a state that voted for Biden by the slimmest of margins, and a state that in a country that's going to trend potentially 10% to the right in 2022, I don't think that Georgia's going to stay blue. Like, I get it's trending blue. I get that it'll be more favorable to Democrats now than it has before. In my lifetime. But I don't necessarily think that Georgia is going to be a state that votes for the Democrats because the suburbs, I think, are going to come back to the GOP a little bit, not as much as I think some people are expecting, but I think those, if you talk about like a rubber band effect, I think it'll come back, maybe 15-20% of the way, not even, a quarter, but maybe a fifth if the GOP has a good night. So suburban Atlanta is really tough to read. We've seen good signs for Democrats and Republicans, but I really do think that there are going to be a decent amount of Biden voters who do come back and vote for the Republican Party due to the perception that the economy is bad. So I'll go with Walker to win this race. I don't think he's that good of a candidate. I think that he's going to make a lot of errors. He had a blunder where he questioned why apes hadn't gone extinct, which I don't think was the best look for him. It kind of painted him as kind of just a dumb guy, which you don't want to be. You understand it to be smart. So that wasn't a great look for him, but he is he's not going to blow this race, even if he's not a great candidate. He'd have to seriously mess up this race to lose, and I don't think he'll do that. Could it happen? Yeah, that's why it's lean and not safe. And Warnock is not a bad incumbent, but I just don't think that the Georgia Democrats are in a position to win where Georgia voted 4% to the right of the country in 2020, and it's probably, in all honesty, going to vote to the left of the country this year, but it probably still won't be by enough to keep the state blue. So the next state that I'll give to the Republicans at the tilt level is Arizona. Actually, no, sorry, forget that. Scratch that. We'll give Arizona to the GOP, which will give them the majority, but I think Pennsylvania is a lean as well. And Pennsylvania is a state where the Republicans do not know who they're going to nominate, nor do the Democrats. We have a wide variety of outcomes we could see. We could see a Fetterman versus Oz race, a Fetterman versus McCormick race. We could see a Lamb versus Oz race, or a Lamb versus McCormick race. So, with that being said, my current prediction is that Fetterman wins the Democratic primary because Lamb has the endorsements, but his campaign is not looking great right now. And Fetterman has the lead in all the polling we've seen. And then I think I'll go with Oz to win the Republican primary. McCormick has a bit more experience because he served in the Bush administration, but he's a more moderate Republican who I think has expressed new support for gay marriage and is kind of socially liberal. Not socially liberal, but he's less conservative on social issues than Mehmet Oz would be. And so in the GOP primary, I think that's kind of toxic for him. So I'll go with the Oz versus Fetterman race, and I don't. Seasoned viewers of the channels will know this. I'm not a big John Fetterman guy. I don't think that he's the best candidate for the Democratic Party because there's this notion that because he's a stereotypically big and scary working class dude that he can from Pittsburgh, he can get back that vote. When in reality, he's a left wing politician who doesn't appeal to working class voters who drift away for the Democratic Party because they have become left wing. You don't win back those voters by going further to the left. You win back those voters by either appealing to them in some way or by going a little more to the center. And Connor Lamb does not seem to be the ideal candidate either, but I think he's better because he did, in 2017, he did win a seat that voted for Trump by 20%. And it was narrow, but he did win that seat that was in working class regions of Pennsylvania. So he's done it before. Fetterman hasn't. But Fetterman right now, I think, will be the nominee. So um, Fetterman, I do think, would lose to both Oz and McCormick. He'd probably lose to Oz by like 4 or 5, McCormick by maybe 2 or 3. But I do think that the Republicans are favored in Pennsylvania. The Democrats would need to really, really up their game in suburban Philadelphia, and I don't see that happening. So for now, I'll give it to the GOP. Arizona, I don't have as strong a feeling on. I could see Kelly win re-election. He has got a big war chest. He's a good campaigner, but um, you know, Brnovich would probably beat him pretty bad, probably like 3-4%. If it's Kelly versus Masters, I don't know. It's more of a toss-up, but I think Masters would narrowly be favored, just because Arizona is one of those states that I think, a big chunk of votes in Arizona are centered in wealthy suburban Maricopa County. And Maricopa County is or the suburbs, Scottsdale, Mesa, Phoenix, or not really Phoenix, but Scottsdale, Mesa, Carefree, Glendale, etc. Those areas are all very white and wealthy, and a lot of those voters switched over to Biden in 2020, but they're probably going to go back to whether it's Brnovich or Masters in 2022, and they're going to vote against Kelly this time around because Kelly, he won in 2020, but that was a really good year for Democrats in Arizona, where they did quite well in a lot of suburbs, and I don't think that they'll do as well this year. They'll do fairly well, but they won't do as well, and they did really well in 2020. So it's just if they get 90% of what they got in 2020, they'd still lose because of how close it was. So Arizona, I expect to go for the GOP, but it's narrow. Nevada, I think, is the closest race this cycle, but I'll give it to the Democrats. Catherine Cortez Masto is a good incumbent. She's someone that I think can win, and I think as of right now will win. So the reason I say this is because I trust Cortez Masto a bit more than I trust Democratic incumbents like Kelly and Warnock, because Cortez Masto this is her second rodeo, right? Like, this is her second time running for re-election, or running for election, I guess, and like, I get that that's like the same number of times that Kelly and Warnock have had because they won in 2020, but Cortez Masto won in a year that was not great for Democrats. Like, 2020 wasn't an amazing year for Democrats, but they won the presidency that year. Cortez Masto won in a year that Democrats did not win the presidency, and they lost the House popular vote. So it wasn't even that good of an environment for Democrats, like, realistically. She also doesn't have that great of an opponent. Adam Laxalt's okay, but he's not good enough, I think, to beat a senator who's decently popular like Cortez Masto. Cortez Masto also has the advantage of doing really well with Hispanics. In 2016, she, I think, ran ahead of Clinton with Hispanic voters, and Clinton actually did pretty well with Hispanic voters in Nevada. So, it wasn't like she ran ahead of the bare minimum. Clinton did pretty well with Hispanics in Nevada. She won the state. Cortez Masto did even better, and she won the state too. So, I do think that Cortez Masto is going to do better than Biden with Hispanics, especially in Clark County, because in 2020 Biden did really badly in Clark County with Hispanics. He did well in the suburbs, which kind of made up for it, but urban Hispanics in the city of Las Vegas itself were not great for Democrats because the COVID shutdowns impacted the Democrats negatively in Nevada, and the Democrats were not able to formulate a good message. And I think Cortez Masto is better at that than Biden was or will be. So of the two big toss-ups, I think the Democrats win one and the GOP wins one. But I wouldn't be stunned if it goes the other way. If the Democrats win both, I wouldn't be stunned. If the Republicans win both, I wouldn't be stunned. But for now, I'll say Nevada is narrowly going for the Democrats. But yeah, that's my prediction. Tune in to the podcast. I'll put the link on Twitter and on YouTube. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll hope to see you on the podcast. Bye.